We have a lot to catch up on, so I will try to keep our intro really brief and short. I have with me my colleague Fatma Al Ibrahim, and we will be moderating the session for you today. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A box and interact with the presenter in the chat box, and we will try to respond to you as much as we can and as per our knowledge. I have with me Rachel Finney today, who's the Director of English Language Teaching. Thank you, Rachel, for being here. I appreciate you for taking the time out. And Rachel has over 30 years of experience with English language teaching, and she's authored a large number of ELT books as well, and she's been working for major ELT publishers. You can see all about her profile on your screen right now. And I'm so glad that Rachel could take out the time to be here with us for the training sessions. Thank you, Rachel.
Okay. Sarish, thank you so much. Everybody, hello. A huge hello from me. I'm absolutely honored and delighted to be here today with you and to share with you some things that you really need to know about TopGoal. Thank you for making the time to attend this session, and I really hope that you get a lot out of it. Now, there are a couple of things I need to say before we start with the actual session itself. We would have liked to use breakout rooms. There are so many people in the session today that has rendered itself impossible. It's untenable for Zoom to do that. We're limited on the number of rooms, and it simply won't work. It wouldn't be a good experience. It wouldn't be useful to you. So I apologize for that. There will be handouts, a couple of handouts about this session, and we will share those with you when Sarish sends you your certificates, your attendance certificates. And the other thing is, the session is broken down into 3 parts, which I will outline in a moment. At the end of each of those 3 parts, there'll be 5 minutes for questions and answers. Ordinarily, in a presentation with a smaller group, I would love you to join in and to ask me the questions as we go along. It will be very hard for me and Sarish to allow that to happen, and it will impact on the amount of time that we've already got available to cover things. So the questions will be confined to those 5-minute sessions at the end of each of the 3 parts of what I'm going to be talking about today. So before I open the very first session, we will be looking at 3 things: the framework, the principles, and the methodology that have informed TopGoal and that you as teachers need to understand so that you're able to teach it in the best possible way. Part 2 is the actual content that you will be teaching in the first trimester. So giving you ideas, hints, and tips about things you can do with the lessons and explaining the format of the units. Part 3 is looking at teaching young learners grammar, specifically inductive grammar, why we've chosen that approach, what's good about it, and how you can actually put it into practice. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing. Let me share my screen with you, and then we will be able to get started. Now, I need confirmation, maybe Sarish, that that's visible to everybody.
Yes, I can see that.
Super. Okay, well, that's
one question. Sorry, Rachel. There's
Yes?
someone, Hanan, who said I cannot hear. So I can hear Rachel really well. And what you need to do is to make sure your audio is connected once you log into Zoom. So we're pretty much live. I can hear Rachel. A lot of participants can as well. So you might need to make sure you connect your audio. And I will write that down because you can't hear me. So.
Yes.
Okay. Bye.
Okay. Sarish, the very last thing to say is just give me a nudge when it's coming up to 35 minutes for this session, so we make sure we preserve the 5 minutes for questions if you can.
Got it. Yes.
Okay. Super. Right, let's start. Framework, principles, and methodology for TopGoal. So this is looking at what you're going to be working with in trimester 1. And basically you'll be teaching the welcome unit, unit 1, and unit 2. So in terms of the specific stuff that we talk about today, that will be our focus. When we look in part 2 at more detail, that will be our focus, what you're dealing with in trimester 1. Okay. Now, the trimester 1 scope and sequence is there for you to see in more detail. This is also included in your teacher guides, as is a lot of the information that will help you in teaching these lessons. So you'll have plenty of support in that respect for teaching TopGoal. The point about this is that it just shows you all the different elements of the lesson, so you're aware of the progression, what's being covered, the lesson outcomes, basically. So that's the scope and sequence, and that's what you'll be teaching in trimester 1. So let's start looking at those principles and the framework for TopGoal. These key features are features about TopGoal that are specifically important to you as teachers teaching relatively young learners. So I start off here with age-appropriate topics. We know that if we're teaching students topics that aren't relevant to them or aren't of interest to them at their specific level of cognitive development, then we're going to miss the mark. There's going to be a distance between us and the student, and that is going to interfere with their chances of successful learning. So we choose in TopGoal age-appropriate topics that students can relate to and will be comfortable engaging with. The pace and the progression throughout TopGoal is absolutely aligned correctly. It is gradual and it is incremental, building on the learning so far as it proceeds and pushes that a little bit further in the next lesson. The gradual pace and progression. The content is aligned with both Cambridge CEFR levels and the Michigan Test of English. So these are highly acclaimed correlations that are internationally recognized and carry some accreditation. There is an exposure throughout the course, throughout TopGoal, to target vocabulary, to relevant functional language. Again, this point about relevance is particularly important when we're teaching younger learners. And functional language is language that's useful to them, that they can understand why they need to learn it. So again, it's important that they're exposed to that. And when we put exposure, we're talking about language that may not be the target language, but that is included in the background, for example, story background information. And so the students are hearing it and seeing it and become familiar with it almost subliminally. So that element of exposure, that's the scaffolding around the target language, is really important. And the recycling, of course, of the target lexis and the target grammar structures. So they're presented, they will be revisited, they'll be reviewed, they'll be recycled in that spiral kind of formation that you're probably familiar with in your own teaching. TopGoal has a welcome unit and a goodbye unit, and you'll see these as you explore the book. The welcome unit, as you saw, is part of what you'll be presenting in the first trimester. That welcome unit, and we'll look at it in more detail shortly, is really important. That's going to be your first contact with this particular book with the students. You're introducing the book to them. It's important that the connections are made and that there is engagement with the contents and that they are prepared for the course with that good foundation level, which is what the welcome unit does. The welcome unit looks back, it recycles, it consolidates, it establishes the baseline for all the learning throughout the rest of the book, throughout the rest of the academic year. And just for you to know, there are 8 core units in the student book. You may know this already, and 12 pages per unit. Again, you may have looked, you may know this. And every unit ends with a game-like review. So there is an assessment opportunity at the end of every unit, but it isn't a threatening or intimidating assessment opportunity. It's a review. It's a game. Students can play in pairs or small groups, and they can look back through the book. They can have some fun, but it still serves as that little assessment piece to give them and yourselves an indication of their progress throughout that particular unit. So there are 8 of those, 1 for every core unit in the course book, the student book. We also include in TopGoal an integrated learning lesson, which gives the students an opportunity to see how English can be used to explore other curriculum topics. And there is also, importantly, a social and emotional learning feature in all of the core units. And you will know and will have heard that this is becoming more and more recognised as important for younger and younger learners these days, in talking about things like relationship skills, cooperation skills, self-awareness, communication, those social and emotional skills that our students need to develop alongside their language skills. The workbook lessons are very much aligned with the student book lessons, page for page, apart from the last 2 pages where the workbook, as you will see in a few minutes, has a 2-page integrated skills review. And the workbook, which is colour, has young learner exam type activities, which is quite unusual for a workbook and definitely a plus in terms of the exposure to those sorts of activities for your students. So those are some key features around TopGoal. This slide reiterates some of the very good practice principles that teachers of English to young learners really need to be aware of. I have no doubt that most of you will know most of these, or maybe even all of you will know all of these, but I still want to go through them because we can't reiterate them often enough, and I can't stress how important these are in terms of having success as a teacher and also having fulfillment as a teacher, if I'm honest. I've started with making learning fun, and quite frankly, for me, that's one of the key things in teaching younger learners. If it's fun, we are far more likely to have success. The students are going to enjoy the lessons, the learning process. We as teachers are going to probably find it more rewarding because there will be evidence of students' engagement, of their participation, and actually of their progress. So making learning fun is key. If it's boring, if it's repetitive, if it's unappealing, it's very, very hard for students to engage with that kind of a teaching cycle. So make learning fun. Use things like colour and movement to add interest, to support student engagement. Use lots of visual material. Change the pace in a lesson. With younger learners who have limited attention spans, everybody these days has shorter attention spans than they used to have. Our younger learners have even shorter attention spans than we do because they haven't learnt the ability to focus and control their thinking, focus their mind. So changing the pace, sometimes going from quiet to loud or calm to quite active in terms of the exercises and so forth that you do, or the way you present some of the learning modules, that will help to retain the engagement and to keep the attention. So changing pace quickly, taking into account those short attention spans. Personalization, as we know, is important for all our students. The more they can contribute their own ideas, share their thoughts and views, give their own experiences, the better, because it means that the process means something to them. They have a connection with it. So encourage personalization, enable pair activities and group activities so students can support each other, they can cooperate, they can collaborate, without the teacher always being close right there. They can do that in a safer group with their peers, with their fellow students, and feel quite comfortable to use the language maybe and have a little bit of an experiment with some of the new words and structures that they've learned. Use different patterns of interaction in the classroom if you can. Use teacher-student or students, but also use student-student and groups of students with groups of students. There's all sorts of different configurations that, again, give that element of variety to a lesson and change the pace of a lesson. Of course, plenty of support and scaffolding, and TopGoal will always give you that. And I come back again to making the point about the teacher guide and how important it will be for you because it includes lots of extra information. Include creative activities when you can. Children learn well through creativity, and any activity like that helps them to develop their creative thinking, which is a skill they're going to need more and more these days, even going as far ahead as into their careers, into their working life. Differentiate between quiet time and more noisy time. Essentially, that's part of the changing pace as well. Create a safe and a supportive environment in the classroom. Sounds very simple or rather daunting, but specifically what this means is creating an environment that is safe for your students to explore the language, not to feel afraid about making mistakes, to know that they can feel confident in saying something in a new way for the first time without being laughed at, without being told that they pronounced a word incorrectly. That's a safe, supportive learning environment. And all our students, and particularly our younger learners, really, really need that. They need to be nurtured, and they need to know they're safe to experiment with the language. And when you need to use language one, use L1. Why not? There will be times when that's essential, in my opinion. It's not, I don't necessarily believe L1 should be excluded by any means. I think it needs to be limited in its usage, but at times it will help you, and it will help the students to gain an understanding. 3 good practice principles out of all of that we've just talked about, which underpin the whole creation of TopGoal: curiosity, and the fact that our students are keen and curious to learn, and we can capitalize on that as teachers and give them the very best learning experience. In terms of what's in TopGoal to support that, there's a focus question in every unit, lots of opportunities for pair work, for discussions, for sharing personal ideas, for reflection, for research and finding out more. So that's one of the 3 principles. Diversity is throughout TopGoal in terms of different learning preferences, different levels of ability, different teaching styles. And again, in the teacher guide, you'll find more about that. And different learning preferences as well. So all of this is catered for in TopGoal, with different activity types, different suggestions for teaching approaches or how to deal with specific lessons, special features, lesson formats. And then fun. Again, we just can't get away from fun, really, if we're talking about teaching young learners. So there's lots of elements of humour throughout TopGoal, in the stories, in some of the illustrations, the review game, the chants, and so forth. So keep those things in mind as we move on to look in more detail at the actual methodology. Some important things to say about the methodology. We've mentioned already this paced incremental progression, and that's there, and it's solid and it's reliable. So you don't need to worry about that at all as you're working through the course. The 3 Ps were around when I taught over 30 years ago, when I started teaching English, and they're still around today. And there's a very good reason for that, because they are fundamentally completely reliable. It works as an approach: presentation, practice, production. It's logical, it's solid, and it ticks all the right boxes. And we'll look again in detail at grammar and vocabulary lessons, and we'll see that in evidence in TopGoal. We have built-in routines to account for learning loss. The welcome units are a prime example of this, because they are there to specifically address any potential learning loss in a preceding vacation prior to the starting of a new level. But there are other things as well, where we're recycling language and just checking that there's that spiral, a recycle, review, revise pattern going through the books. Modern topics, again, remember they're relevant, they support learner engagement. The inductive approach to grammar, which we'll look at in part 3 in much more detail. Opportunities for the learners to take some autonomy and some control in pair work, in project work, in doing the workbook. Reinforcement of the social emotional development aspect, and that vocabulary alignment, so that although it's not an exam course, it still offers students some degree of preparation for exams, should they be going to take them. Presentations are context-based, which is extremely important, and communicative. Again, aspects which we fundamentally know support successful language learning. So context-based, communicative, a variety of genres in the stories and so forth. That variety, diversity between and within lessons, the activities, the pace, the topics, all varied, all engaging and stimulating. There is active and receptive vocabulary in teaching, but lots of active learning. The listening and the reading lessons, which we'll look at in detail, always have pre-reading or listening activities by way of preparation. There are also sub-skills built into TopGoal. So although it's only a course for young learners, we still give some attention to the early start in developing sub-skills around, for example, reading, maybe predicting the title or predicting the order of certain elements of a text or whatever. Those sub-skills become more and more important as your students progress towards college, university, and career. They'll still be important when they're working. So we start that gentle development of sub-skills early, the gradual development of letter and word acquisition, which starts in TopGoal and carries on through the 6 levels, and supported writing development. One thing I want to mention briefly, you may have seen, if you've looked at TopGoal, is that you may have noticed that there are 7 colourful little mascots. They're cute, they look nice, but they are there for a reason. It's up to you how you use them, but I wanted you to understand why they are actually there in the book. So they add fun, they're engaging for the learners, they can support the learners sometimes in more serious content and so forth. There's one of the mascots presents the stories, for example. It's just like a little bit of extra engagement, the mascot. The mascots have little personalities of their own, which you as teachers can use if you want to at any time, because they very much feed into our students' imaginations. They provide an opportunity for our learners to think creatively, to conjure up stories and ideas of their own about the mascots, what the mascots might do. And you'll see the mascots in evidence in the welcome unit and the goodbye unit. They are on the page there as a symbol presenting a language element throughout the other core units. But they are present in the welcome and the goodbye unit, and they are there for you to utilize them in ways you feel most appropriate to your class group. And to be frank, you can be informed by your students on this. They'll tell you what they think of the mascots, or if they have ideas about them, or if they've thought of stories around them or whatever. But they are there as a vehicle for engagement, but also for creative thinking. So taking an overview of the methodology of vocabulary and grammar in TopGoal, we've got that, as we said, for vocabulary on the left, that gradual presentation and progression of lexis, which is divided into 2 points in terms of a unit. So in level 4, then we have 12 new words in the opening vocabulary spread, and a subsequent 8 new target vocabulary words in the second 1-page vocabulary lesson. So that's the pattern throughout all of the units, a larger presentation and then a smaller one for vocabulary and for grammar as it happens. The vocabulary is contextualized with a clear picture to give it again meaning. That the key thing is to contextualize a lot of this new vocabulary and new grammar so that the students can understand its relevance and see it in a context that makes sense to them. That makes it far easier to digest. And then there are task-based activities to utilize for both vocabulary and grammar. Moving to the grammar column on the right, clear contextualization of grammar also makes it easier to understand the meaning and the use if it's set in a context that the student is familiar with. And as I said, the inductive approach to grammar is what we use for all sorts, and we'll talk in detail about that in the third part of this session. So, and remember the 3 Ps: presentation, practice, production. Every time there is a vocabulary or a grammar lesson in TopGoal, it is always based on the 3 Ps, the presentation, practice, and production methodology. Okay, in terms of reading and literacy in TopGoal, obviously this is given significance. There's a range of fiction and non-fiction texts, things like diary entries or factual texts or whatever in the units. So all of those support the development of reading skills, the opportunity to see vocabulary and language grammar in context, and further develop the student's literacy. Stories also have a social and emotional learning box feature associated with them. And that's an opportunity for the students to make some sense or see the social and emotional learning feature in action, as it were, in a context, in a situation, enabling them to relate it more easily to themselves. So the story and the reading pages have a different approach, not the three Ps approach, obviously. The approach there is a before, a during, and an after approach. It's a 3-step approach. So the before reading, preparation, think about the topic, engagement in one way or another, activities whilst reading a text, and then after reading is finished, a post-reading, after reading activity, along with the fact that sub-skills, reading sub-skills for reading and listening, sub-skills are included. Those are detailed in the scope and sequence that I showed you at the beginning. You'll find them in the teacher guide, and they're a really important part of the lessons as well. Similarly with listening and speaking, the same kind of principles, the same kind of approach as you would expect. So lots of a different range of genres, a different contexts, but always in contexts that are relatable. Sub-skills, again, for listening are included. There's examples there, like listening for detail, identifying a setting, for example. The listening lessons, as the reading lessons, have that same before, during, and after approach, instructional sequence. So it really makes sure that the teaching is done in the best way. The students will get the most out of that lesson by using that approach with the preparation, engagement, doing activities while they're listening, and then that reflective transposing opportunity after they've finished listening. Speaking is always included as well as the productive skill that's related with the receptive skill of listening. So there are plenty of opportunities throughout TopGoal to use that link between the receptive and the productive skills, and for students also, again, to personalize, to give their own ideas, thoughts and so forth, and share them with their classmates. Also important to mention that the workbook also has listening activities, even though generally the workbook might be done at home or independently, it still includes listening-based activities, just so that you know. So things to remember specifically about TopGoal, and this is the last slide before we're going to stop for questions. So I think, unless Sarish tells me otherwise, we're doing not too badly for time at the moment. So there's that focus on diversity in TopGoal, which talks about, or which means diversity for your students in terms of their learning preferences, their learning abilities, their current levels of ability. There can be diversity in all those things within one student group, as you know. And also the diversity of your own teaching approaches. So you have opportunities to apply the teaching approaches you feel are most suitable for your student group. So the course TopGoal accounts for all of that. It is easy to teach. It isn't a course that is difficult, has hidden secrets somewhere. It's not explicit. Everything in TopGoal is clear, and the teacher guide will give you a huge amount of support in teaching the course to your students. It gives you ideas, it gives you things to start the lessons with. It gives you a little assessment point at the beginning of every lesson, a little assessment point or idea at the end of every lesson, ideas for fast finishers, and so forth. So it's easy to teach, and there is plenty of support for you to teach it. It does address early literacy development and gives a lot of time and space in the book to the development of reading and writing. We use the inductive approach to grammar, and as we've said, all of the vocabulary is carefully graded, and it's aligned to the young learners' exams, the main young learners' exams. That whole element of creative thinking, for example, in TopGoal, we have projects at the end of every unit, and the TopGoal projects are scaled to be exactly at the right level for the students and to give the opportunity for creativity. It's tempting sometimes for teachers not to do the project because maybe there's a time limit and so forth. I would encourage you to do things like the projects in TopGoal, because they do give that opportunity for creative thinking, and that's a real plus for your students. The welcome units, as we've said, are unique and they have a specific relevance and a purpose for your students. Do focus on them. We'll look in more detail shortly. The game-based review pages, please remember those, please use those, because they have a purpose, but they're fun and they give you as teachers a good indication of where the students are, how well they're doing. Engaging reading texts and stories with fun incorporated into them. Skills work development, which is aligned to CEFR descriptors. And then we looked at the sequence, the 3 Ps, for teaching grammar and vocabulary. And we've also talked about the 3-phase sequence for teaching listening and reading, looking at the before, during, and after parts of a lesson. Workbooks have that exam practice, which gives another opportunity for your students to be able to prepare for that exam type setting. We haven't talked about assessments, but for you to know, there are unit tests, term tests, and course tests, end of year tests. And the term and the course tests have A and B formats. So those are available for you. The workbook is in colour. It's full of a range of exercises that all consolidate what's been learnt in the student book. And we foster cross-curricular work with the integrated learning lesson. So are there any questions on that so far? It's a lot, and I know I've galloped along. Actually, timing is better than I thought, so if we can have 5 minutes, that's great.
You did very well on the time, by the way.
Good. So, do you have questions, Suresh?
I didn't come as such as questions, except that is there an interactive CD? This was one question. Because this helps us very much for our students and teachers. So Muhammad actually wanted to know if there's an interactive CD.
There isn't, but I'm very interested to hear what sort of things would our colleagues expect to see on an interactive CD. Is there any way we can find out specifically?
I think it's the course they currently use or were using. It's called We Can.
Yeah.
If you know of that, Rachel.
Okay, all right.
And another question that has come in very quickly is, where can we find the related presentations and assessment sheets?
When you say assessment sheets, do you think, Suresh, we're talking about tests, or don't you?
I think so, yes.
Okay.
And if there is a teacher's guide, another question. Another question about the interactive book. By the way, I did see the interactive book question come in a lot. So I'm not sure what about the interactive book?
Okay, let me go through those in order. So the tests, that there is a suite of tests. Now, I don't know the system in terms of the schools in KSA and where those tests are likely to be kept, but they will be provided if they haven't already been. I'm going to look into it to find out where they are, because they're written and they're ready. So we will make sure that the tests get to where they need to be so they can be delivered. So that test, the suite of tests will be available. That's one thing. The second thing was whether there was a teacher guide, and there absolutely is a teacher guide. I would urge you to read the teacher guide. The introduction, which is quite long in itself, I think about 30 pages, contains a huge amount of information explaining, reiterating the methodology, the approaches in TopGoal, why certain things are done in a certain way. It reiterates some of the good practice principles we've talked about. It reiterates the methodology and so forth. And then for every lesson, there is a real lot of detail there to support teachers in presenting that specific lesson and giving extra suggestions, sometimes games and things you can do in class to brighten up an activity, to make that particular lesson a bit more interesting if it's a grammar lesson or something that isn't especially illuminating. So there's plenty of content in the teacher guide. They should be available or they may be being worked on now. I will find out and make sure that they get, again, as the test to where they should be. Interactive book. Now, as I understand it, Sarish, this is currently being prepared right now.
Okay.
I'm going to follow it up, but I know that there will be one in the same way as there is for the other course.
Yes, a lot of questions about the interactive book.
Okay, yes. I'm going to go and look into that straight away, but I am confident there will be one because we know that that's part of the system, part of the expectation. So that's being done. Yeah. Any others?
I don't know what this is, but can you talk about jellyphonics?
Jellyphonics.
So I don't know, Rachel, what that means, but
Jollyphonics.
it says, yeah, okay, maybe that's what
There
it
is
is.
Jollyphonics. It's Jollyphonics. I can, yes. Jollyphonics is based on a synthetic phonics approach. That's not an approach that we use in TopGoal. And obviously in the earlier levels, the lower levels, the alphabet is taught. And we taught the alphabet alphabetically rather than synthetically, for the simple reason that TopGoal is a generic course book. Jollyphonics is a phonics dedicated program. And I'll briefly explain the difference. It's not massively relevant here, but I think it's important to know the difference. Jollyphonics is about synthetic phonics. What synthetic phonics does very basically is the very first presentation of letters is not A, B, C, D. It's P-I-N-S-A-T, I think. And what that does is enables children immediately to decode quite a range of words, because if they learn how to say so, at, p, in, they can say pin, they can say is, they can say in, they can say it, they can say sat, they can say at, they can say pan. So synthetic phonics, Jollyphonics, presents letters in a way that enables decodability. And that's the basis of it. The students go on to learn other letters. They're then able to decode even more words. Obviously, they learn primarily words that are decodable, that are pronounced as they are written. But they do then go on to explore all the peripheral information around that. That's the basis.
Thank you, Rachel. I'll ask one last one, honestly,
Okay.
because I think this was very generic and maybe some people have this question.
Right.
Is TopGoal 1 based for 4th or 6th grade?
TopGoal 1 is based for this book that we're talking about now is based for 4. So grades 4, but as I understand it will be used for 4, 5 and 6 this year.
Okay, so I think that answers your question, Ali. It's 4, 5, 6. Okay, that's all from me. Thank you, Rachel.
All right. Okay, super.
Oh, also, a lot of people are asking when do we end and the duration. We end at 3 o'clock KSA time, but we have a lot to cover, so stay with us.
We're doing well.
We're doing well on time. Thanks, Rachel.
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much. Righto, let's move on. So the second part of what we're going to look at is a much closer look at the content in TopGoal, because this is what you're going to be teaching in trimester 1. It's important you understand the philosophy, you've had a look, you've understood the feel of the unit, and you feel comfortable teaching it. So it's a look at the content in detail and some lesson hints and tips. So I talked about the welcome unit. This is the very first unit in the book. It's there partly for learning loss, but specifically to welcome the students into that particular level of the book. It serves the purpose of revising and establishing, as I said before, that baseline from which the students will progress throughout their academic year. So you can see on the screen what the particular welcome unit in TopGoal looks at, and that's some of the vocabulary that will be being taught. We also tell you what the exposure vocabulary is in TopGoal. Do you remember we taught earlier at the beginning about exposure to language and how important that is, if it's relevant language or functional language, just for the kind of, if it's learned receptively, gradually, it will go deeper into the child's memory, depending on their level of cognitive understanding. But exposure to language is important, and we highlight that in TopGoal. And then also the grammar. In this particular welcome unit, there's revision of that crucial verb to be. Also looking at simple past, adverbs of frequency, comparatives and superlatives, some fairly basic elements of the English language. So the welcome unit should be good, should be used for establishing prior learning. It's another opportunity right at the beginning of the course for you as teachers to find out what your students know already. You're going to get, of course, in any class group, a diverse range of levels in terms of language knowledge. But the welcome unit gives you some opportunities to establish that prior learning and to see where the students currently are at. As we've said, the welcome unit will account for learning loss. It will give a good opportunity for that revision and consolidation of some of the prior learning that we know will have taken place. The welcome unit welcomes learners to the new school year. And that's important. It's particularly important with this book for this year, because you haven't used it before, your students haven't seen it before, and you definitely want to get off on the right foot, to use an English expression, with the contents. That first point of contact, that first lesson is really significant for your class and for you. And it's important that it's right, that it sets the right tone, and that it goes well. So we will look in a moment at the pages on the welcome unit you're going to be working through, and we've got some ideas around them that might help you. And as a reminder, you will get a copy of this presentation or access to it when Sarish sends you your certificates. So you will get all this information and be able to look at it again. So it welcomes learners to the new school year. Really important opportunity to establish, this is the course we're doing, we're going to enjoy it and explore it together. It presents and consolidates age-appropriate language. Some is likely to be revision. There may be some that will be new to some students. Revises common verbs in this particular welcome unit, and revises comparatives and superlatives. All right, so that's the overview. Let's look at a spread from the vocabulary unit. So with these spreads throughout the unit, what I've done is give suggestions about what you can do. And as I say, you will have access to this, you will be able to use this if you want, but sometimes it may also spark an idea in your own thoughts, or you might not want any of these suggestions. I'm sure you're perfectly competent teachers. But just sometimes I think it helps if you have ideas that maybe you hadn't thought of, or maybe are slightly different from what you would normally do. They're just suggestions. So looking at this particular spread, I'm going to go down the left side of the boxes in the first place. So going down here, use items in the picture to elicit prior knowledge. This gives us the opportunity to establish the levels of prior knowledge amongst our students. So there's plenty of things in the picture you could ask about. You could put, to the second point, learners in pairs to point to and name items in the picture. Depending on how successful your students are at that, will give you an indication of their prior knowledge. Okay, so it establishes a little bit of a baseline. The bottom point on the left-hand side, play a word game like Stickman or I Spy with some of the target vocabulary words. Now, the target vocabulary words throughout TopGoal are always in this colour. They're always in blue. So for this particular welcome unit, those are the target vocabulary words. So you could play a game with those, like Stickman, which you could do on the board or whatever as a class, or I Spy, or whatever you feel is most appropriate. Going to the ideas on the other side, have learners share their own back to school experiences. So here we have children and the mascots going back to school for the start of the new school year. It's an exciting time. They're all moving up in a year and so forth. There's lots of things to exploit in that and to be excited about. So it's an idea in terms of personalization and involvement of the students if you encourage them to share some of their own experiences. And thinking again about that safe learning environment, you might think it's better for some of your students to do that in small groups, in pairs or small groups, so they don't feel too exposed in front of a whole class of people, or they don't feel they're being watched by teacher or whatever. That's entirely up to you. But it's an opportunity, a spread like this in a unit like this is an opportunity to do that sort of thing. It's appropriate, it's relevant, and it gives that personalization opportunity. Always do teach unknown words, pre-teach unknown words, and there may be unknown words in the chant here at the side. If there are any unknown words, pre-teach them or have students say whether or not they know them. You could also call out words from the chant and ask the students to look at the chant, see if they can find the words. So those are just some ideas for that opening spread, as well as what actually the teacher guide will tell you you can do with the spread. These are extra things. And then at the bottom, the welcome unit will ensure your learners are well prepared. It hopefully will ensure as well that your learners are already starting to engage with the course, which is important, and that they're ready to carry on learning with TopGoal. So this is the next spread of the welcome units in trimester 1. So it's still got that fun aspect to it. And for you to exploit that as teachers, these are some suggestions of things that you might like to do to extend the content, to extend the learning opportunities from some of the activities. So looking again at the left, you can extend the listening activity, for example, by having your students read or act out the story. I mean, in my experience as a teacher, my younger learners in particular used to really enjoy acting out stories in small groups and that kind of fun role play activity. So if that's something your students also enjoy, this is an opportunity to do that. Have them do some of the activities on this page, on this left-hand page of the welcome unit, in pairs or small groups. So again, that's taking the focus off them a little bit if you're walking around rather than watching the whole class. The groups can do some learning and a little bit of experimenting, or they can support each other. I mean, we know from research that sometimes student-student support is every bit as valid as teacher-student support. And if you mix up your groups with better able and less able students, then the chances are sometimes there will be that peer-to-peer learning as well, because the better able students can share some of the words or give some hints or support another student in finding the answer to a specific question. So have learners do some of the activities in pairs or small groups. And at the bottom of the left-hand page, extend the listening activity by having learners, again, read or act out the story down there. Actually, I'm not sure if that's quite right. I think that should be something else. I think that might be an error, sorry. On the right-hand side, point out for this activity, students are filling in blanks. Point out that the missing words are all on the page, the other page, in exercises 1 and 2. Sometimes students who are not so confident are quite unnerved by activities like this, where they think they have to produce a word out of the blue. In a book like TopGoal, that's very unusual. We, as we've said, work incrementally through a lesson and we build it up layer upon layer. So where students are asked to produce missing words, they will have seen those words in that lesson. So make sure that students understand that. You can extend exercise 5 here by writing the target words actually on the board, and then having learners act them out to make it a little bit more fun to learn the vocabulary and use the vocabulary. At the end, there's an activity, a pair work activity. If you're someone who has a confident class group or certain students who feel confident enough, activities like this are really nice to get students to come and to the front of the class and model the questions and answers for the rest of the class. Again, it's an element of that student-to-student teaching idea, peer-to-peer teaching. So it's nice for the students who are confident to do it. It's also nice for their classmates to see them doing it. It helps the other students to feel more confident. So on the last page of the welcome unit, remember the welcome unit is only 6 pages long. The other units are 12 pages. So on the last 2 pages, the last spread of the welcome unit, this is what you will see. And you need to explain, as it says top left, explain the objective of this particular lesson to your learners. And this is a consolidation of the welcome unit, but it's the sort of last opportunity at this stage to really do a good revision activity, a really good consolidation of what you know at this point. So do you remember? That's what it's called, and that's why. So there's this consolidation of the grammar and the vocabulary in this unit. And for exercise 1, what you can do is maybe read the text out to the class yourself. Most of the texts in TopGoal are accompanied, as you would expect, by an audio element as well, so that students who don't learn so well visually but learn well orally are also supported, and also the pronunciation and so forth is supported. So usually you'll see reading and audio. This particular reading text doesn't have that, so you might think as a teacher it's a good idea if I read this out first, clarify some unknown words, and then I've given some extra support to the class in being able to read and answer. Okay, if you've got good readers, it's another opportunity for you to involve a student in the teaching role, and a student could come, or some students could come to the front of the class or read out the text to the class, whatever you think is best. For exercise 2, if students, again, were a bit concerned about this, you could first of all ask and answer as a class, or work with the class yourself, and then leave them to maybe take over some of the questioning and answering themselves. For exercise 4, the suggestion here would be to have learners think of their own true sentences for each of the adverbs. So you're talking about adverbs like sometimes, often, never, as well as the sentences here, which they're ordering, putting in the correct order. Extend this, if you wanted to, by asking them to think of some sentences of their own that are true for them. And then for the next exercise, I've actually suggested that you could play a game and to utilize really the target grammar that's in this particular activity, which is the past simple of the verb to be. So if you played someone who, using was and were, you would be expecting students to say things, I know someone who was at home last night. I know some friends who were at the park yesterday. Things like that. So it's quite simple sentences, but encouraging the students to practice it themselves in relation to their own life experiences, but using the target grammar. Again, they could do it in groups, or they could do it as a class, whatever you think. And the last activity would be, I would just suggest that you maybe could ask learners to see if they can think of some more questions around the text in the preceding exercise. So again, these are suggestions that we have for you. You will have suggestions in the teacher guide for everything. There is no activity in the whole of TopGoal where there isn't a suggestion in the teacher guide for how to do that activity one way or another. Okay, so then we move on to Unit 1 of this student book. And this particular unit is about family events, starting with family photos. Okay. The point is, this is the first spread, and it is a vocabulary spread. So that is the format. What we're going to look through now is the format for all of the units in TopGoal. The opening spread is a vocabulary spread, and there will be imagery, pictures of one form or another used to present the target words. And do you remember that I said the target vocabulary is always in blue? So it's very clear to see what the target vocabulary is. Okay. So also I want to reiterate about this, that those 3 Ps are there, as they always will be in a vocabulary lesson. So here, presentation. This is the presentation of the vocabulary, all on this page here. Big, full, clear, colourful presentation. Then the practice activities, these activities here, where the students have to practice using the words, and then production. And this is very often a pair work speaking activity where the students will produce the language themselves to talk about their own experience, their own life. Okay, so that's exactly how you would expect to see a vocabulary lesson in TopGoal. That's what it's going to look like. Presentation, quite clearly, then the practice activities, ending with a production activity. Always. Similarly, with grammar. The second spread in every unit, core unit of TopGoal, the second spread is grammar. So it's that 2-page. These two, if you remember from when we looked at the load, the vocabulary load and the grammar load are heavier here. There will be another 1-page lesson later in the unit, but this is the main grammar presentation. So it's the same thing. It has the presentation on the left, and we will look at this a little later, precisely why it's presented how it is and what the implications of that are. But this is the presentation, and like the vocabulary, these grammar words are in blue for clarity. So the students can very easily identify what the grammar is, where it is, and how it's formed, how it looks. Okay, so the grammar is presented. This table is here. And then the questions start about that presentation. This is all part of one process, really. Then moving on to the practice and the production. But again, always 3 Ps, always presentation, practice, production. So we've got an opening spread of vocabulary. The next spread is grammar, and that's a clear load in terms of this is the new vocabulary, these are the new structures for this unit. So, general points about vocabulary teaching with TopGoal, and it's important for me to tell you that you will have a handout sent to you with these points as well as having access to the worksheet, to the slide decks. So, in TopGoal, we know that level-appropriate vocabulary is presented always in a context that's relevant to our learners, through a topic-based approach. So there'll be an overall theme for the unit, which again, I think you would expect in English language teaching books. The theme of this one is family. So the words are related to the overall theme, they're in the right context for learners, and they are linked to young learners' frameworks in terms of the appropriateness of that language. There are those 2 entry points for vocabulary, the opening spread, and then a 1-page lesson later in the unit with a slightly lower load. There are extra notes that will be on the handout that I will provide for you. Note that the corresponding workbook lessons for vocabulary can be used in the classroom if you want to. It's entirely your choice as teachers as to how you want to utilize the workbook. If you want to do it in the classroom, even if learners do it individually and quietly, that's absolutely fine. But it can also be done at home if that suits your needs better, whatever you prefer. And I keep coming back to this all the time, but the teacher guide will give you tons of support in terms of how to teach vocabulary. And the same thing with grammar. The syllabus has been planned according to all the frameworks and the common accredited bodies that we can relate to and follow. So it looks like this follows the progression of Cambridge Young Learners Grammar Pathways. There are 2 entry points for grammar in the same way as there are for vocabulary. So the second one has a lighter load again. There will be notes on this in the handout. And again, the same points about the workbook. Utilize it to support the grammar in the student book in whatever way you feel is best for your class group. Lots of options, really. And use the teacher guide. Use the teacher guide. Right, so after that, after you've had your vocabulary spread, then you have the grammar spread, then you move on to this in every core unit, always. The story and a listening and speaking lesson. All right, so I could talk for an hour about stories with young learners because they're so important for so many reasons. But we know how significant they are. We know how effective they are in teaching language, particularly with younger learners. And we know they support creativity, they support the development of imagination, they provide opportunities for personalization and numerous other things. But primarily, we are still talking about language in context. And that's the fundamental thing about the stories. It's still presentation of language in context. We try to make many of the stories fun in TopGoal, and they're illustrated and they're age appropriate, but they're still a vehicle to present language. So you can exploit them by maybe having the students read sections of the story in small groups. You'll notice that they do always hear these stories on the audio. In the core reading sections, it's always the case that the audio is a representation of the reading text, and they will hear it and read it. But you can utilize that, you can extend it by having them read aloud or read to themselves or read in pairs or groups or whatever you feel is appropriate. If you see at the bottom, this is an example of one of the social and emotional learning features. And you'll mostly find these on the story page because, as I mentioned before, the philosophy, the point that's made in the SEL feature is somehow incorporated in the story. So it has relevance here. The students can make the connection between an event or something that happened in the story and the SEL feature. So the teacher guides give you some very clear, specific information about the social and emotional learning points and about how to deal with it in the classroom. Mostly they are, as this one is, questions which your students will need to read and then discuss. So important things to tell them are there are no right or wrong answers. I would say it's generally better for them to do this in small groups where, again, they feel safe, they feel they can talk without embarrassment, and they're not exposing their emotions or anything too much. But like the projects, sometimes I know that teachers might prefer to avoid some of these features because the learning outcomes are less overt, less obvious. But the learning outcomes are important for this feature and very relevant for the satisfactory social and emotional development of your learners. So I would say we as teachers have a bit of a duty really to make sure we do address these aspects, these elements in our lessons. And I would encourage you as teachers to include this particular feature and not to overlook it. So there we go. The teacher guide will give you a lot of support on those every time, individually tailored to the feature in the particular lesson.
Rachel?
Yes?
Sorry, I'm interrupting you. Can you tell us where the teacher guide is again? There are tons of questions about where can I find the teacher guide. And there's one helpful answer actually that I think Nora suggested. Nora said it's online on the Madrasi platform. I hope I got that correct. It's online on the madrasa platform, I think. So she suggested that that's there. Thanks, Nora. But a lot of people are asking, where can we find this teacher guide?
Okay. Now I already have a note to myself with teacher guides ? Where. So I'm going to underline it because I wish I knew. Ideal with content but I don't deal with the production side. So I
Correct.
need to go back and find out, but I absolutely 100% will. I'll do so today. I don't know that platform that our colleagues named, but it's definitely worth a try.
Yeah, she said that it's there online on the platform. So thank you for helping us out there. That's what she said. So maybe you guys can check on that platform. It's called Madrasa. Anyways, sorry, Rachel, I'll let you continue.
No, Sarish, that's fine. Do feel free. I'm going to check from my end that everything is where it, done as it should be and so forth. There's no issues. I would know if there were problems, so there aren't, but I can't tell you where they're located there. So, but we'll find out. We'll find out for sure. Thank you, Sarish. Okay, so listening and speaking. We've said a few things about this already. We've already touched on the fact that there is a pre-listening activity and a post-listening activity. And you can see that here on the page. So exercise 1 is an engagement with the lesson because the students are going to look at the pictures and they're going to say what the activities are, for example. So that's simply, it's nothing testing, it's nothing difficult. It's a gentle way into the lesson, but an element of engagement, an element of students starting to think about the right topic for that particular lesson. They'll already be thinking about maybe their own experiences, what they know, and so forth. So they're engaging, they're preparing. Sometimes that might be more aligned with a sub-skill, like look at an extract from the listening and see what you think the audio is going to be about, for example, where you're trying to predict or infer information or whatever. But this one is very simple and is simply speculating about a topic from imagery, which is fine. Okay, so the other thing about listening lessons is that they will always include an element of speaking, importantly. So listening, receptive skill, speaking, productive skill. The exercises can be done individually or as a class. That's very often an option for you anyway, and I'm sure you know and exploit that. Whatever is most important for your group, and allow enough time for the post-listening speaking activity. Back when I used to teach, speaking in the school, one of the schools that I taught in, speaking was often something that was neglected, in my view, mistakenly, because it very much needs to be concentrated on, so that students can feel confident in speaking and develop their pronunciation, articulation, intonation, so forth. But it did get overlooked sometimes or seen as even a bit of a waste of time. I'm going back quite a few years here. Really do allow enough time for the post-speaking listening activities, because they are opportunities for the students to practice speaking. And if you do allow it in pairs and small groups, it's also those safer opportunities where students can do something when they're not directly in the eye of the teacher, as it were. So do allow enough time for those to happen. But that's the next sequence. So you're talking about your vocabulary, grammar, then story, listening and speaking. Then we go back to those second vocabulary and grammar lessons. So the vocabulary is new, but a lighter load than the first vocabulary presentation at the beginning. Still relevant to the overall theme of the unit, the overall topic of the unit, of course. So you can extend practice activities by, for example, in this one, exercise 3, you could maybe add some extra sentences yourself. You could extend the first activity with the presentation of the vocabulary by seeing if students could think of an example sentence utilizing the vocabulary word each time or whatever. And there will be suggestions in the teacher guide on how to do that as well. Similarly with the grammar, it's a new grammar point, but it is still presented inductively. And the words, as you can see, for vocab and grammar are still in blue. All right then. At the end of the vocabulary page, and remember these pages, these lessons are shorter, but still use presentation, practice and production even where there are only 3 activities. Okay, so still following that methodology, but the production activity here is a game, and games and grammar are something that people don't see as the best of bedfellows, but they can be. And games very often help the teaching of anything because they reintroduce the fun elements. And where there's the fun element, there's engagement and better learning. So games are a really good way, in all seriousness, to support grammar lessons and to conclude grammar lessons or enhance them, make them a little bit more interesting. Again, in the teacher guide, there are whole pages of the introduction or large sections, various large sections of the introduction in the teacher guide dedicated to giving you a bank of games that you can use. And those games are then subsequently referred to throughout the teacher guide in the chapters. So it's just a matter of finding the teacher guides, but I know that they're somewhere. We'll definitely find them. You'll definitely find them. Okay, so that's that second vocabulary and grammar lesson. And then moving on, we've had the story lesson. This is the reading lesson. So I'd said to you before that TopGoal is quite dedicated to literacy. So there are 2 separate lessons dedicated to literacy in slightly different ways. The story, the reading. Okay, so the reading lesson, it's again before, during, after. So there'll be a little question beforehand. And this one has that sub-skills element in it because they are going to look at a picture to predict what the description is about. And that predicting from images, that is a sub-skill that your students will continue to use as they progress through their learning journey, whether it's language or whatever. Okay, so that's the pre-reading task. Then the students are going to read the text and decide whether the statements are true or false. Now here, where there are only 2 tasks, the post-reading activity will be in the teacher guide. So very occasionally, there simply was no room on the page for a post-reading activity, but that will be in the teacher guide. So don't forget, it will still always be there. And that will just check and consolidate the comprehension or find a way to utilize some of the knowledge. Okay. So then after that reading lesson, we come to word work and writing. This is where we focus on the granular word, on the construction, the shape of words, word formation, word families, and collocations, prefixes, suffixes, all those elements that relate to the word in isolation. So we're taking quite a kind of magnifying glass view, if you like, of words in this lesson. Over the levels of TopGoal, this starts at a very basic level with letters. It's called letter work. I think the first 3 levels, because we're building up alphabetic knowledge and so forth. But by this level, this is word work. Okay, so here we're looking at how words change if they change from formal to informal in terms of what we call the members of our family. So there's just an explanation about how the word formation changes and so forth. And then the students will use that word, and then they will see a text and work with that and then write about their own family. So the writing element is obviously the last question in this lesson, but it's important to note that the preceding question provides their model. So we don't ever ask the students to produce any piece of writing without there being a model available for them to base their work on. And that's really important in writing. Writing and producing a piece of writing is really daunting for our students. So it's important they've got that model, not to copy word for word, but certainly to base their writing on. And they can lean on it quite heavily if they're less confident students, because it will help them to gain in confidence. Okay, so it's really important that they know that that is the model that's there for them. And then they produce their own writing. There aren't really any tips here for you, other than the fact that you could read out or get the students themselves to read the reading text in the reading lesson. You could also do the same thing with the model in the word work and writing lesson if you wanted to have a student read it out or whatever. But there will be more information in the teacher guides as well to help support you. Okay. And then this is the last of the spreads. The last 2 pages of every unit look quite like this. So on the left is the integrated learning lesson, which we talked about before. And this is a lesson where English is used to talk about a different curriculum subject. This is a very relevant, obviously, subject for the students. But it gives the opportunity for students to see, okay, we're learning English to learn English. If they learn English, they can explore other topics, other subjects through English. English is a gateway to that. English is a platform for that. So it's interesting and reinforcing for them to see English used in different ways rather than purely a vehicle to present the language and practice the language. Okay. So that gives that opportunity. It provides diversity. It's slightly different from the other lessons in the book. It's something interesting. So it ticks quite a few of those good practice principle boxes we talked about way before. And then I've talked several times about this game-like review at the end of a unit. That is what it looks like for those of you who haven't had a chance to look at the books yet. And as I said, it can be played in pairs. It can be played in small groups. The teacher, you don't have to look closely. It's useful, I think, for you to walk around while the students are doing this, to be there to help if they need any help. And also you will get an idea from how the students are playing this game as to how confident they are. Students who are very unsure will look back for everything, look back for all the information, flick back through the unit. Better able students, more confident students are more likely to remember some of the answers for these things very easily and just complete them, say them, or whatever. So you will get an idea of their progress. And then right at the end, the project, which gives us opportunity for that creativity, for imagination, for personalization, and something I would encourage you to allow the students to do or support the students in doing. It can be done at home. It can be done in any way that the student wants, but it's a nice thing. It's a good thing. It's a very constructive thing, creatively, educationally for them to do. So a quick look at the workbook. Sarish, are we okay for time?
Yes, but I have a very pressing question from
Okay.
10 people have asked me the same question.
Yes.
So I'd want you to answer that. It says, is story, listening, and speaking taught in one lesson?
No. 2 lessons usually. 2 lessons. Yeah. I mean, teachers find their rhythm and know their classes and know an appropriate pace. But we would say that story is a lesson. Listening and speaking is a lesson. Reading is a lesson. Yes. Now, by the same points, the vocabulary and the grammar spreads can be done as lessons in some cases. Other cases might want a bit longer. So you will be guided by your classes, but basically all those individual lessons that are labeled, even the 2 opening spreads, vocabulary, grammar, each label lesson indicates one lesson. Where that may change is if your group needs more time for that vocabulary load and those exercises and the workbook, and the same for the grammar. But story, reading, listening, speaking, all one lesson each.
Thank you, Rachel. And time has rushed by. We have 10 minutes
left.
Yes.
Right, I'm going to shoot through the workbook very, very quickly because I do want to talk about inductive grammar. Okay, so you can look at the workbook and at these notes in more detail when you get a copy of this deck, but you'll see that, as I say, the pattern in the workbook reflects what we see in the student book. and it exploits the activities. And this is an example of one of the young learners' exams type activities in the workbook that we can see. And those occur quite often. The last 2 pages of the workbook I mentioned before, it's an integrated skills review. That's what this looks like. So it's pulling in reading, writing, well, not writing actually, I don't think, but reading, vocabulary, grammar. It's trying to get a more collated approach to consolidating the learning. So that's what this does, is integrated skills review and a very small self-assessment chart at the bottom for the students to complete for themselves. Okay, so questions if we have time, Suresh. Do we have 2 minutes for questions?
I think that was it. And I have good news. We have found out how you can get into the teacher's guide.
Hooray!
Yes. So thank you, Ali Al Musa. He said that for those teachers who are asking about the teacher's guide, you can download it from the AN website from Ministry of Education. I'll repeat that. For those of you asking for the teacher's guide, you can download it from AN website from the Ministry of Education. He has also sent the link and I've just posted it again. So thank you, Ali, so much.
Right, I am going to, in the last 9 minutes or so, I believe, talk about the inductive approach to grammar. This is what we use in TopGoal for all of the grammar lessons, and we use it because we believe it is the best way to teach grammar effectively. Okay, so there are some quick points about it. We don't need to focus on this too much. We need to teach grammar within the context of good practice principles for teaching young learners. We've talked about those points. They're a reiteration of the points that we looked at earlier, so I'm not going to spend time on that. This is what I think is important for us to share. Inductive grammar teaching is student-centered. It starts with the grammar in context. That's the first thing, the grammar in context. Then students go on to discover or deduce what the rules of that grammar might be by looking at the examples that are presented in context and deducing patterns, understanding the patterns. So inductive grammar teaching is basically a 3-stage process of exposure, where students are exposed to the grammar, they see it in context, pattern recognition, where students look at the grammar and think, basically, and rule articulation, where the teacher confirms the rules the students have discovered. That's the essence of inductive grammar teaching. The pluses, it's more engaging. Of course, it's more engaging. Students have to look at the grammar, read it, think about it, decide what the structure is, and work out what the rules are. That's super engaging. Retention is likely to be deeper because the learners have learnt through discovery. That's a big plus. Also, learning this way helps students to apply grammar themselves in a context more effectively. That's what the research has shown. Negative side is time consuming because some students can take a long time to work out the rules. They can become frustrated because they don't really understand it. And obviously that's not good. And it can be challenging for teachers because knowing as a teacher where to guide the student's discovery, when to intervene, those are quite important decisions in terms of inductive grammar. Okay. So a quick example. In practice, learners can read a short story with numerous past tense verbs included. They're highlighted. The learners discuss the word structure patterns that they see. They hypothesize as to what the past tense grammar rule might be. Maybe they spot the ed at the end of the verbs. Teacher will then confirm or guide them towards correctness, or ultimately maybe correct, okay? Inductive grammar. Deductive grammar, teacher-centered, starts with the grammar rules, which personally I would find fairly dry. And then students do exercises to practice using the grammar rules. So the 3 stages of that process are the presentation of a rule, which the teacher explains. The students work on, the teacher gives examples are given to exemplify the rule, further examples, and then structured learning. Students complete exercises where they practice applying the rule. Okay, so it doesn't sound so interesting to me. Plus is, there is definitely clarity in this approach because the students are getting the clear explanation of the grammar rule straight away. It can definitely be quicker because there's no time for the students to work out what's going on and so forth. And it does provide a solid framework for understanding grammar. However, on the negative side, it's far less engaging for our learners. Some students will then struggle on transposing what they've learned into different contexts and reapplying the grammar successfully because they've learned it in a very controlled situation where they were spoon-fed, they didn't learn through discovery. And it's passive learning. And passive learning of information is rarely as effective as learning through discovery and deduction. So, an example activity, teacher starts the lesson by explaining the grammar rule to learners. For example, past simple, I play, I played, and underlines the ed ending. And then learners do an activity to rewrite the base form of other regular verbs to work to produce the past simple. A bit mechanical. So there's the summary. Deductive, teacher role, presenting information, student receives it. It's a passive learning style. It's fast, but engagement is low. Inductive grammar learning, teacher facilitates discovery. Students are active participants in an active learning process. It's slower, but engagement is higher. So it's important that we, and we do this in TopGoal, prioritize learning in context to make grammar more engaging and meaningful, support grammar learning with games, pair work, group work, and so forth. And it's important that learning by discovery, we remember, is effective in securing understanding and retention. An example of such an inductive grammar lesson would be using a story, let's say, that incorporates the natural target grammar in an age-appropriate context that learners can relate to. Let the students study the grammar in that context, identify the patterns used. If necessary, you as teachers can intervene. That's down to your judgment with your knowledge and expertise and your knowledge also of your student group. It's a shame, but sometimes it does speed things up and you might have a few students who are holding up the class. You may need to intervene. And then plenty of practice, but you'll see that practice will go well once those earlier processes and that learning by discovery has happened. I put this quote because this really sums it up, I think, in terms of inductive grammar. Don't give me a fish, but teach me how to catch it. That was very rushed, I'm sorry, but there we are. Any questions on that?
Thank you, Rachel. That's a lot that we covered in 90 minutes. I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sorry.
There are a lot of questions. I'm afraid we might not have time to go over a lot of them because there are 5,000 of you in this webinar and there is only me and Fatma here and Rachel. So you guys have outnumbered us for sure. But a couple of things, Rachel. Are there any objectives for the lessons that we know the students have achieved? Like, do we have objectives for each lesson?
Yes. Do you mean in terms of what the lesson is seeking in terms of learning outcomes, aims, and so forth?
Yes, this is exactly what the person means.
Yes. Those are given at the beginning in the teacher guide. That it's made explicit what the lesson is, the purpose of the lesson, the outcome. Yes.
Another one for you. How many lessons each core unit will take?
Again, it really depends. It's very, very hard to say. It will depend on you as teachers getting into your rhythm with it. You could be looking at about, it depends, could be around 5 hours of English a week, could be less, could be more. It really, really depends on how much is taught in the classroom, how deeply you go into it, how much time you allow around it. Even taking the grammar lesson, for example, inductively teaching that lesson may take longer than if it were taught deductively and you simply told the students the rules. So it's whether you're able to allow sometimes the elements of time for the lesson to flow naturally and develop organically, or whether you have to confine it because you know what your academic plan is and so forth. If people want to contact me to sort of talk more about particular lesson plans and so forth, they can. I've done tons of correlations and so on around courses to make sure that they fit into people's academic years and so on. But it very much depends on how lessons are conducted and organized.
Thanks, Rachel. And I have a question. It's not really a question, Rachel, but a comment. And I think there are a lot of teachers who have posted this question and in the same format. So I'm guessing you all are sitting together and like, this is the question we need answers. So it says, it's an interesting one, and I think it's just your thoughts, Rachel. Many students in our classroom cannot read or write. They're still at the beginner level. The top goal is higher than their current level. What can we, as teachers of TopGoal, do to help them?
Mm-hmm. Yes, very good question.
Yes, and there are like 15 of this, so I'm
okay. Fundamental point is to try to do some basic alphabet and word building work with them prior to launching into the welcome unit, because that may be, if they can't read or write, that may be daunting. So even spending the first few lessons looking at the English alphabet, saying the names of the letters A, saying the pronunciation A, giving an example word, ant. I'm saying ant because it's decodable. It's simple. That would be the most basic fundamental thing I could recommend. But if we're really talking about learners who can't read and write English, then they have to have some kind of step ladder into the welcome unit. And at least if they had that, they will have developed, as they've learnt the English letters, a little bit of a vocabulary. Maybe you can also be speaking in English to them. My children, just as an aside story, and very, very quickly, grew up in Greece. We went there when they were babies. We put them into what's called pronipia in Greece, which is a pre-nursery class. They were very, very tiny. They didn't speak a word of Greek. Nobody in our village spoke a word of English. So there is evidence that people can learn language by absorption, almost basically, by that immersion into a situation where that's the language spoken and you will learn it, kind of thing. I'm not suggesting that for your students, but I am suggesting that speaking English in the classroom quite naturally about things you're doing, this is my pen, this is my book, and those sorts of things. That will help as well in those very early stages when they know so little and you're trying to at least acquaint them with the English alphabet, the left to right, writing, reading, and everything else. Because there's a lot to overcome for them to be quite ready to go into the welcome units. I think it would be harder for them if you went straight in. I would spend a bit of time just on that real baseline preparation.
That makes sense. No, that's really thoughtful, actually. Thank you so much, Rachel, and thank you everyone for joining us. We have come to the end of our session. Sorry for taking a few more minutes. A lot of FAQs about the recording. Yes, you will get the recording along with the slides that Rachel has shared. So we will be sending this to you via email. You will also have some handouts. I know you guys love handouts. So you will get those handouts on your email as well. So 3 things: you will have the recording, you will have the slides, and you will also have the handouts. A lot of questions about, am I getting a certificate? Yes, you will. If you join this link, this webinar, using the link that's in your email, not sharing, but using the link that it's in your email. Every link is unique. So if you've joined it using the link that is given to you on your email, yes, you will be getting a certificate for this session. Another FAQ that I have seen a lot of questions around was, How is my attendance marked? So once you join this session, your attendance is marked. You're automatically here. So you don't have to mark your attendance anywhere. We know you're here. I can see your name. Your names have already been provided to us by the ministry. So you're registered. You don't need to do anything. But however, you do need to join us tomorrow because we have the training tomorrow as well. Because I saw a lot of questions about, are we doing this tomorrow as well? Yes, we are. Yes, we are. What time? Same time, 1:30 p.m. Saudi time, KSA. So 1:30, and the duration is the same. We will
The
end at 3.
duration is the same. It's quite a different, it's a much more theoretical session tomorrow. It's more about teacher professional development, looking at different learning and teaching theories. It's not product orientation.
Thank you for that explanation. So this is the difference between the two, because some people were asking that, is it a repeat session? What are we going to cover
Completely
tomorrow?
different.
So it's completely different. It's not going to be product orientation. It's going to be professional development, as Rachel mentioned. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow, 1:30. Don't forget, the link is going to be in your inbox, okay? You will get a reminder 15 minutes as well before. And that's it. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Suresh. Thank you, Fatma. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.